My wife cheated on me with my own son. The realization hit me like a freight train, shattering everything I thought I knew about my life. I had spent years believing I had built something unshakable, an empire, a family, a future. But in an instant, it all turned to dust. I always considered myself a lucky man. I built a thriving business from the ground up, transforming a small venture into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I had a beautiful wife, Emily, who turned heads wherever she went, and a comfortable life that most could only dream of. But there was one part of my life that had always felt incomplete: my relationship with my son, Tyler, from my first marriage. Tyler was 22 now, a young man full of potential, but the bond between us had never been strong. After my divorce, Tyler had grown distant, living with his mother and only seeing me sporadically. When Emily came into my life, she never showed much warmth toward Tyler. If anything, she seemed indifferent, treating him like an afterthought. I had always chalked it up to the natural friction between stepmothers and stepchildren, never giving it much thought. After all, I had a marriage to focus on, a business to run, and a future to secure. But something had changed in Emily over the last few months. I noticed it in the little things. She had become more secretive, guarding her phone with a vigilance that hadn't been there before. She started going out more frequently, always with vague explanations. Her usual cool attitude toward Tyler had also shifted, subtly at first, but enough for me to take notice. When Tyler came over for dinner, Emily was suddenly more engaged in conversation with him, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm lightly, as if encouraging some kind of closeness that had never existed before. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe she was just making an effort for my sake. Maybe, after all these years, she was finally warming up to Tyler. But then came the inconsistencies. A dinner she claimed to be attending with friends, but had no social media post to prove it. A perfume scent on her that wasn't hers. A hotel transaction on our joint credit card statement that she couldn't quite explain away. The doubts festered in my mind like an infection. I found myself watching her more closely, dissecting every interaction, every text message she hastily put away when I entered the room. The worst part wasn't even the suspicion itself. It was the slow, gnawing realization that I was right. I tried to push my doubts aside, but they whispered to me in the silence of the night, keeping me awake as I lay next to the woman I had once trusted with my life. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew the truth was waiting to reveal itself. And when it did, it would change everything. The moment that shattered my illusion came in the most unexpected way. One evening, I arrived home earlier than usual. As I stepped inside, I heard voices from the living room. Emily's laughter, light and flirtatious, and Tyler's voice, low, intimate, a tone I had never heard from my son before. Something about it made me freeze in place. I stood just beyond their line of sight, listening. "I can't believe we've gotten away with this for so long," Emily murmured, her voice carrying an unmistakable excitement. Tyler chuckled. "You're the one who said he'd never suspect, and you were right." I felt a slow, creeping cold spread through my veins. My breath was shallow, my heartbeat pounding like a war drum. I forced myself to stay silent, to not react. Emily's voice softened, but her words were daggers. "Just be patient, Tyler. Once I get everything in place, he'll be out of the picture, and we'll have it all. You, me, and a fortune he doesn't even see slipping through his fingers." A cruel, amused silence followed, and then the unmistakable sound of a kiss. My world tilted, my stomach lurched as the meaning of their words set in. This wasn't just an affair. This was betrayal on a level I hadn't even imagined. My wife and my own son, together, plotting against me. The rage that surged inside me was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just anger. It was a deep, searing humiliation, a raw, exposed nerve being pressed upon with unbearable force. I wanted to walk in, to destroy them both, to watch the smugness melt from their faces as I revealed what I had heard. But that would be too easy for them, too predictable. No, I would not let anger control me. If they thought they had fooled me, then I would let them believe it a little longer. I would smile, I would play along, and in the shadows, I would set the stage for their downfall. I inhaled deeply, stepping back from the doorway. My hands curled into fists, but I forced my face into an expression of neutrality. I had to be careful now. The game had changed, and I needed to be the one who set the rules. By the time I walked into the room, my expression was carefully composed. I greeted them as if nothing had changed, sitting down with the two people who had just conspired against me. I forced a smile, clinking my glass against my son's. "To family," I said, and inside, I was already planning how to destroy them both. I didn't sleep that night. As Emily lay beside me, her breathing slow and steady, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts that refused to settle. The weight of what I had heard pressed against my chest, a suffocating force that made every breath feel like a struggle. Betrayal, a word that I had only encountered in business, in contracts broken, in competitors stabbing each other in the back. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a violation of everything I had built, everything I believed in. My wife, my own son, a conspiracy against me, whispered between stolen kisses. I turned my head, looking at her. Emily's face, peaceful in sleep, looked almost innocent. Almost. But I knew better now. I knew the venom that hid behind those soft lips, the deception in those warm brown eyes. My hands clenched into fists as I resisted the urge to shake her awake, to demand answers, to force her to see the destruction she had caused. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I had to be patient. If they thought they were in control, I had to let them keep believing that. I had to be smarter than them, stronger than them. The first step was evidence. I needed proof, undeniable, indisputable proof of their betrayal. Not just for myself, but for leverage. If Emily and Tyler were planning to push me out of the picture, they had to believe they were succeeding. And for that, I had to make them feel safe. The next morning, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. Over breakfast, Emily greeted me with a warm smile, kissing my cheek as she poured my coffee. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, sickly sweet, cloying now that I knew the truth behind it. Tyler, having spent the night at our house under the pretense of a late work meeting nearby, sat across from us, completely at ease. I forced a laugh at one of Tyler's jokes, pretending to be oblivious. I played the role of the devoted husband, the trusting father, the fool they thought they were deceiving. But as soon as I stepped out of the house, I was already making moves. I called a private investigator, a man I had used once before for a business-related background check. This time, the target wasn't a potential business partner. It was my own wife and son. "I need everything," I told the investigator. "Text messages, call logs, surveillance. I want to know where they go, who they meet, and what they talk about. Money is no issue." The investigator didn't ask questions. He simply agreed to take the job. My next step was securing my assets. If Emily thought she was about to inherit a fortune, she was in for a surprise. Over the course of a day, I transferred key financial holdings to accounts she had no access to. I made calls to my lawyer, setting the groundwork for a counterstrike she would never see coming. By the time I returned home that evening, the trap was already in motion. Emily greeted me at the door with a smile, wrapping her arms around my neck. "You're home early," she said sweetly. I smiled back, hiding the satisfaction bubbling inside me. "Just wanted to spend some extra time with my family." She had no idea that by the time I was done, she and Tyler would lose everything. Over the next few days, I ensured everything appeared normal. I laughed at Emily's jokes, nodded along to Tyler's stories, and even showed them affection. But beneath my calm exterior, I was pulling the strings, tightening the noose around them. The investigator had begun feeding me information, call logs, locations, intercepted messages. Emily and Tyler were careful, but not careful enough. They thought they were winning. They thought I was too blind, too trusting to see the truth. But I was the one setting the rules now. I studied their patterns, noting every moment Emily stepped out, every excuse she made. I learned when and where they met, how long they stayed together. I watched as my so-called wife transferred money into hidden accounts, moving pieces into place for the moment she'd finally make her move. But she wasn't the only one playing this game. I met with my lawyer in secret, drafting documents that would strip Emily of any legal access to my business and assets. I had my bank put a hold on transactions that fit her spending habits, waiting for the day she tried to siphon out the last of what she thought belonged to her. And I had a final ace up my sleeve, something neither of them would see coming. It wasn't enough to take everything from them. I needed them to feel it, to experience the slow unraveling of their carefully laid plans. I needed them to think they had won, only to realize, too late, that the ground beneath them had already crumbled. And so I waited. I waited as Emily kissed me goodbye in the morning, thinking I was oblivious. I waited as Tyler sat across from me at dinner, lying to my face. I waited as they whispered behind my back, believing they were in control. They weren't. They never were. The moment they tried to take the final step, the moment Emily reached for what she thought was rightfully hers, was the moment their world would fall apart. And I would be standing there, watching them burn. The tension in the air was becoming palpable. I could see it in Emily's eyes, brief flickers of anxiety that she quickly masked with forced smiles. Tyler, always the less subtle of the two, had started to appear restless, his leg bouncing nervously whenever we sat together. Something in their little scheme wasn't going as smoothly as they had expected, and I knew exactly why. I had spent weeks planting the seeds of their downfall. Now, it was time to start reaping the rewards. The first domino fell when Emily received an unexpected call from our bank. She had tried to withdraw a sizable sum, likely thinking I wouldn't notice, but the transaction had been flagged. I had made sure of it. That evening, she came home tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Something's wrong with our accounts," she said. "The bank is holding transactions. We should go in tomorrow and fix it." I feigned concern. "That's strange. I'll give them a call first thing in the morning." Of course I wouldn't. The second crack appeared in their foundation when Tyler started to grow restless. According to my investigator, he had been checking rental listings, clearly expecting a payout from Emily's plan. But with the accounts frozen, no money was flowing his way. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. I had intercepted a message from Emily to Tyler. "We need to make a move now. He's too calm, too collected. Something feels off." She was finally starting to suspect. That night, I watched her more closely. Every glance in my direction seemed measured, as if she were searching for some clue that I knew. But I gave her nothing. I was still the devoted husband, the oblivious fool. And so, she did what I had predicted. Late at night, Emily took her laptop to the living room, thinking I was asleep. She logged into our accounts, trying to make an urgent transfer. But I had prepared for this. The moment she hit send, an error flashed on her screen. And then, seconds later, her phone rang. It was my lawyer. I listened as she answered, her voice trembling slightly. "What do you mean I have no access?" Her breath hitched. I could imagine her heart sinking. Then came the final blow. "I'm sorry, Emily," my lawyer's voice came through the speaker. "Your prenuptial agreement has been enforced. Effective immediately, all financial assets remain solely in Michael's name. You no longer have legal claim to any of them." Silence. I could hear the panic setting in. Her breathing became erratic, her fingers tightening around the phone. And then, slowly, she turned and saw me standing in the doorway. I smiled. "Something wrong, sweetheart?" Emily's face was frozen in shock, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. I could see the wheels turning in her head, desperately trying to find a way out of this, but there was none. Her carefully crafted scheme had just crumbled before her eyes. "Michael, we need to talk," she finally managed, her voice trembling. I leaned casually against the doorway, arms crossed. "Oh, I think we do," I said, my voice calm measured. "Why don't you tell me exactly what's going on?" She swallowed hard, glancing at her phone like it could save her. "There's been a mistake, some kind of mix-up with the bank. I don't know what's happening." I chuckled, shaking my head. "No mistake, Emily. Everything is exactly as it should be." She blinked rapidly, processing my words. And then she understood. The color drained from her face. "You did this," she whispered. "You knew." I nodded. "I've known for a while. You thought you were so careful, didn't you?" I took a slow step forward. "But you underestimated me." Her breath came fast and shallow. Michael, save it. I snapped, my voice suddenly sharp. You were going to take everything from me. My money, my home. You even turned my own son against me. From the hallway, a sound, footsteps. Tyler appeared, rubbing his eyes, completely unaware of the storm he had just walked into. What's going on? Emily's head jerked toward him. Nothing. Go back to bed. I turned to face my son, the son who had betrayed me. No, Tyler. Stay. You might want to hear this. His brow furrowed. Dad, what are you talking about? I exhaled slowly, watching Emily's panic grow. Let's just say your little plan with Emily? It's over. Tyler's eyes darted between us, confusion shifting to fear. Wait, Oh, I know everything. I let the words sink in, watching as realization crashed over him. And now, you're both about to pay for it. The weight of my words seemed to suck the air out of the room. Tyler stood there, frozen in place, his face rapidly draining of color. Emily, for once in her life, was speechless. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension, thick with the crumbling remains of their pathetic scheme. Emily was the first to crack. Her eyes darted wildly between me and Tyler, searching for an escape, for some explanation that would save her from what she knew was coming. Michael, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. This isn't what you think. I let out a slow, measured exhale and stepped forward, the movement making her flinch. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think it is. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Tyler, on the other hand, shifted uneasily. Dad, don't. I snapped, my patience running out. Don't you dare call me that. He flinched, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, shame maybe, guilt. It didn't matter. It was too late for that. You thought you could take everything from me. I continued, my voice cold, steady. You thought I was stupid, blind, that I wouldn't notice my own wife and my own son plotting behind my back. Michael, please, Emily whispered, her hands clasped together like she was praying. It was a mistake. I laughed, a short, sharp sound. A mistake, I repeated, tilting my head. So, tell me, was it a mistake when you started sneaking off to meet him? Was it a mistake when you whispered in my own house about how you'd get me out of the picture? Was it a mistake when you tried to drain our accounts? Emily's lip trembled. Save it. I turned my gaze to Tyler, who still hadn't spoken. And you, I said, my voice lower now, more dangerous. You were my son, my own blood, and you threw it all away, for what? A woman who wouldn't look twice at you if you weren't useful to her. He swallowed hard, finally speaking. I thought you didn't care about me. My chest tightened, a flicker of something painful cutting through my rage. And that justified what you did. He had no answer. He just looked away, shame washing over his face. I shook my head slowly. You both disgust me. Emily stepped forward suddenly, desperation overtaking her fear. Michael, please. We can fix this. We can talk. I held up a hand, silencing her instantly. You don't get to talk your way out of this. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. A single tap brought up a video, a crystal-clear recording from one of the hidden cameras I had installed weeks ago. Their voices filled the room. Once I get everything in place, he'll be out of the picture, and we'll have it all. Tyler's breath hitched. Emily let out a strangled sob. I smirked. This recording has already been sent to my lawyer, the bank, and every major player in my company. By tomorrow morning, the entire world will know exactly what you are. Emily dropped to her knees, her hands clasping my leg. Michael, please, I'll do anything. We can fix this. I pulled away, staring down at her with nothing but contempt. No, Emily, you made your choice. Tyler was shaking his head, running a hand through his hair. Dad, you're ruining us. I stepped back, watching them both unravel. No, I said quietly. You did that all on your own. Then I turned and walked away, leaving them with nothing but the ruins of their own betrayal. The moment I walked away from them, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Not relief, not satisfaction, just silence. Behind me, I could still hear Emily's ragged breathing, the occasional whimper as she stared at the phone in her hands, knowing the life she had built for herself had just collapsed. Tyler was silent, but I could feel his gaze burning into my back, like a child who had just realized he'd broken something he could never fix. I didn't turn back. I had nothing left to say. I went to my study, closing the door behind me, shutting out the sounds of their unraveling. The moment I sat down, my phone buzzed. My lawyer, James. "It's done," he said. "The video is already circulating, and the financial blocks are in full effect. Emily and Tyler won't be able to access a single cent." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "And the business?" "Secure. The board has already been briefed on the situation. Your assets are locked down. Legally, Emily has no claim to anything." I exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of my desk. "Good. Are you all right, Michael?" James asked after a moment. I considered the question. Was I? Should I be? I had won. I had executed my revenge with the precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. And yet, yeah, I said finally, "I will be." There was a long pause. Then James sighed. "If you need anything, call me." I hung up, letting the phone drop on my desk. From the hallway, I could hear Emily moving, her voice hushed but frantic. Tyler's responses were short, clipped. They were arguing, turning on each other already. Predictable. I stood and walked out, watching as Emily frantically packed a bag. "Where do you think you're going?" I asked, leaning against the doorway. She spun around, startled. "Michael, please. We can't stay here. The press, the fallout." I raised an eyebrow. "So now you're worried about the consequences?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. She wasn't used to being on this side of things. I turned to Tyler. "And you?" He glared at me, but there was no real fight in his expression. Just exhaustion. Defeat. "What do you expect me to do?" he muttered. "You ruined me." I scoffed. "I ruined you." I took a step closer, my voice low, dangerous. "You ruined yourself. You made a choice, Tyler, and now you get to live with it." He looked away, clenching his jaw. I tossed an envelope onto the bed. 2 one-way tickets. No destination. Just an exit. "Take them," I said. "Get out of my house. Get out of my life." Emily hesitated, her fingers hovering over the tickets. "Michael, please. Just listen." I stepped back, arms crossed. I did listen. Every time you lied to me. Every time you laughed behind my back. Every time you whispered in the dark, thinking I wouldn't hear. Her shoulders slumped. She knew it was over. Without another word, she grabbed the tickets. Tyler followed, but he didn't look at me as he walked past. The door shut behind them. For the first time in a long time, I was alone, and I had never felt so free. The house was silent, a silence so deep, so absolute, that it felt like a living thing. Emily and Tyler were gone. The door had slammed shut behind them, and with it, the last remnants of the life I had once believed in. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the stillness, letting the emptiness settle over me. And then, finally, I exhaled. I had won. Yet as I moved through the house, every room felt cavernous, hollow. It was as if their betrayal had poisoned the very air, leaving behind a space that no longer felt like my own. I walked into the living room, where only hours ago my entire world had collapsed. The remnants of their presence were still there. Emily's perfume lingered in the air. Tyler's jacket was draped over the chair. Small, insignificant things, and yet they felt like echoes of the war that had just been fought and won. I picked up the jacket, staring at it for a long moment, then tossed it into the trash. One by one, I moved through the house, purging it of their existence. Emily's designer dresses? Gone. The framed photos of us together? Thrown into the fireplace. The expensive gifts I had once showered her with? Useless now. I pour myself a drink, the whiskey burning its way down my throat. My reflection stared back at me from the glass doors leading to the balcony, tired but victorious. And yet there was something else there, a question lingering beneath the surface. What now? For so long, I had focused only on revenge. Every move I made was a calculated step toward this moment. I had imagined feeling triumphant, vindicated, and in some ways I did. But there was no undoing the damage. The people I had trusted most had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. The marriage I had once cherished, the son I had raised, both gone, exposed for the hollow lies they had always been. I checked my phone. News articles were already spreading the story. Millionaire CEO's wife and stepson exposed in shocking affair and fraud plot. The internet was tearing them apart. Emily had always cared about status, about how people saw her. Now, her name was plastered everywhere for all the wrong reasons. I wondered where they had gone. I wondered how long it would take for them to turn on each other completely. But I didn't care. They were no longer my concern. I finished my drink and stepped out onto the balcony, looking out at the city skyline. My empire was intact. My fortune was untouched. Everything I had built was still mine. But for the first time, I had no one to share it with. And maybe that was for the best. The days that followed were surreal. I had spent so long planning my revenge, preparing every detail, anticipating every possible outcome. But now that it was over, now that Emily and Tyler were gone, I found myself standing in the ruins of a life I no longer recognized. The house was quiet, too quiet. There was no more forced laughter at the dinner table, no more whispered lies in the dark, no more betrayal lurking beneath the surface of my daily life. I should have felt relief, but instead, all I felt was exhaustion. A heavy, bone-deep weariness that settled into my chest like an anchor. I spent the first morning alone, sitting in my study, staring at the stacks of documents my lawyer had sent over. Divorce finalized. Financial accounts secured. Business assets untouched. Legally, Emily no longer existed in my world. But that didn't mean she wasn't still out there. I glanced at my phone, scrolling through headlines that seemed almost surreal. CEO's wife and stepson exposed in shocking affair and fraud scandal. Scandal rocks elite circles as family betrayal goes public. Exclusive. Former socialite Emily Pierce falls from grace. The media had latched onto the story with a vengeance, dissecting every sordid detail. It didn't matter that I hadn't given a single interview. People loved a scandal, and Emily and Tyler had given them one hell of a story. I wondered how they were coping, if they had turned on each other yet, if they realized how foolish they had been to think they could steal from me, deceive me, and walk away unscathed. It didn't matter. I had wiped them from my life, and I had no intention of ever looking back. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't ignore the hollowness creeping in. I had won. I had taken everything from them, ensured they would never recover. But victory tasted bitter. The people I had once trusted most had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined, and now I had no one left. That night, I found myself pouring another drink, the familiar burn of whiskey doing little to numb the ache in my chest. I stood on the balcony, looking out at the city I had built my empire in. It was still mine, still standing. But at what cost? James called me later that evening. "Michael," he greeted, "you should know. Emily and Tyler have left town. Seems they're running from the media circus." I took another sip of my drink, staring into the skyline. "Good. You sure you're all right?" James asked after a pause. I let out a breath. I will be. And for the first time, I almost believed it. Tomorrow, I would start rebuilding. Not just my life, but myself. A week had passed. The house was still, empty, yet for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a prison. I had purged every last trace of Emily and Tyler. Their clothes, their possessions, their presence. The echoes of their betrayal no longer haunted these walls. I sat in my office, glancing at the final set of documents my lawyer had sent over. The divorce was finalized. Emily was officially out of my life. Tyler had disappeared from the city, his name only surfacing in whispers of disgrace. Revenge had been served. But now, the question remained, what came next? I poured myself a drink, letting the amber liquid swirl in the glass. The weight of the past few months settled over me. I had spent years building a future for people who never deserved it. Now, I had to build something for myself. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. James, my lawyer, stepped inside. "Michael," he said, nodding toward the papers. "It's all done." I exhaled slowly. "Good." James hesitated. "You know, it's not too late to start fresh. Move somewhere new. Invest in something different." I smirked. "That's the plan." Later that evening, I walked through the city, the cool night air filling my lungs. The weight on my shoulders felt lighter than it had in years. My empire was still mine. My future was unwritten. For too long, I had defined my success by the people around me. Now, I would define it on my own terms. And as I walked away from my past, I realized I was finally free.